All right, welcome to the Fire the Cannons episode of the Pro Football Doc podcast. We're still coming off the glow of the Super Bowl, and great show today. But I promised to tell my Fire the Cannons story that I have at Tampa Bay Buccaneers Stadium there, Raymond James Stadium. We got a great special guest, a lot of topical things to discuss. Including avocado tequila, turf wars, and a new feature, What Happened Here, a video feature that might become even more popular than the Beast of the Week video. But before we get there, let's talk about the Fire the Cannons episode here. Well, let's do this. Let's have this even be more fun. So I can interact with our special guest here. I'll bring him in before we tell the story here. Our special guest today is a friend of mine. Believe it or not, I knew his brother before I knew him. We have a lot of people in common, including, the team physician, Dr. Lowe, who's my friend, but bringing in Seth Payne, longtime NFL defensive lineman, dominated the game in the mid-2000s, Jacksonville, the Houston Texans, and back to Jacksonville. Now dominating Houston radio, and I've had the pleasure of corresponding with him and being on his show. And I thought with all the Houston things going on this week, it'd be fun to chat with Seth. So Seth, welcome to the Pro Football Doc podcast.
Thanks for having me on, man. I'm really, really happy to be here. And yeah, we've known each other a long time through my brother, who was an Ombak rugby player originally. And I've heard a lot of good stories about you, and I love your podcast, man. So I'm excited to be on here.
Yeah, and your backdrop is real, and it kicks butt to mine. I'm just a little office studio. You got the whole professional setup there. So. Here's my Fire the Cannon story. So Dan, you know this, when you go on away trips, obviously the team doctors go with you kind of deal. And for us, you out of Houston, how often did you take 3-day road trips? Probably not very often.
No, it wasn't. I don't know if I can ever remember doing it, though, because we played in Jacksonville, but the only times we went to the Pacific Northwest, we only stayed one night. So it was rare enough for us I think it was more of a disruption to try to take a 3-day trip than to just try to do it like normal and pay whatever consequences.
Yeah, and having been with the San Diego Chargers, we took more 3-day trips than 2-day trips because, look, if you're in Jacksonville and going to Seattle, it's a long way, but it's the return that kills you. The way out, you're pretty good, right? Yeah. And so for us on the West Coast, it's the way out that kills you. The return's easy. So if we were to play in Jacksonville, it probably would be a 10 a.m. Pacific time game. And the game would be over by, 1:30 Pacific time. You get on the buses by 2, you're on the plane by 3. I mean, you're landed in San Diego by 8:30, home at 9. Now, if you're coming from San Diego to Jacksonville, the game is over, a 1 p.m. game is over by 4:30 East Coast time. I mean, you're not home till 3 in the morning.
They're really, and a lot of those East Coast games, if you played a night game, you weren't getting home until 5, 6 in the morning at times, depending on how long the stretch was. So that was a stretch. But I always did wonder what it was like for these West Coast teams, because even when I went from Jacksonville to Houston, you would think, all right, what's the big deal between going at 1 p.m. and noon on a Sunday? And it took me some adjusting to get used to going at noon. And I'm an early riser to begin with, more so than most guys. So I can't imagine what it's like playing at 10 a.m. on your own body clock.
Yeah, and of course, it's President's Day, so the hazards of home office podcasting.
Hi, sweetie.
He's pretending to be our little doggy right now.
Tiger!
Oh, Tiger.
Oh, Tiger. Oh, yeah.
My bad. I'm sorry, Tiger. Okay, Tiger, you want to go play Tiger? No. Okay, you want to sit here. You can sit here. So the Fire of the Cannons is so we go to a game in Tampa. Okay, thank you. When we go to the game in Tampa, we leave on Friday. And this was a big deal for me because I have to cancel my Fridays to leave early, etc.
Oh
And
yeah.
so really many years, 5 out of our 8 road trips would be 3-day trips. So Tampa, so you get in Friday night late, and Saturday you do a walkthrough practice typically. And even though there's not a lot for me to do, it's a team thing, so you go with the team. So I go with the team, and Debbie, here, Denise is calling you. Yeah, let's see how long that's good for, right?
Did you just lie to
They're
your
trying to shut the door here.
On President's
Yeah.
Day, we lie to our
What's the over/under on that, right?
George Washington did, yeah.
Yeah. So they're at the walkthrough practice, and I was like, there's nothing for me to do. It's a walkthrough. They're not doing anything. And so I'm checking out the stadium. I was like, well, what is there to check out? I check out the stadium. You go to the walkthrough to figure out what cleats you're going to wear, where the 40-second clock is, the play clock is, where the scoreboard clock, just to get used to the wind for the kickers. Me, I check out where the x-ray facility is. I see where the locker room is. I go exploring. So what's the thing you want to check out in Tampa? The pirate ship.
Mm-hmm.
So I go to the pirate ship, checking things out. And sure enough, you get up there and no one's around. You could climb on, and then there's a door. The door's unlocked. I'm not breaking in.
Yeah.
I'm walking around. What's up here? And next thing I know, I found myself in the control room. Literally, there was a button that said cannons and a switch. Literally. Yeah. And I was like, wow. That's kind of interesting. And then here comes the do it, don't
was
do
it. Just,
it.
Yeah, it was like your finger was being drawn to the button.
Yeah, there's the classic good angel, be good, don't do this. Do it, come on, it's your chance. And, so there was quite the dilemma there.
Yeah.
And so here's what I settled on. There is a horn for the end of practice. Right?
Yeah.
And I certainly didn't, even though it's a walkthrough, who cares, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't want to get in trouble. So I figured maybe when I hear the horn for the end of the walkthrough, I would fire the cannon, right?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you have pushed the button or not pushed the button?
Okay, you're a doctor, so you're supposed to maintain some kind of an aura of respectability and authority, I suppose.
Or at least fool them.
Wait, who was the coach at the time?
The coach at the time, good question. I think it was Marty at the time.
Oh boy, I don't know. With Schottenheimer, boy, what was Schottenheimer like about stuff like that? I'm envisioning
Marty
something.
and Norv, I forget which.
I feel like Norv would have been cool with it. Now I don't know either of those guys.
I think it was Marty.
But Marty might not have been, depending on the mood, cool with it or how well the walkthrough is going. I would say with
Marty and his family, right? He just passed away, and we can tell some Marty stories too.
Yeah, I would say with Schottenheimer, I would have been. I think if I had played for Schottenheimer or worked for Schottenheimer, there would have been that healthy amount of fear and respect for him that I don't think I would have done it.
Okay, let me throw something else into the equation since you brought up Marty and respect for Marty. I wrote an article at Outkick, and of course, Marty, from playing days, coaching days, a lot of greatness, and one play at a time, hit him in the mouth, all these good locker room things. He always loved being the English major orator. So I'm going to tell you the story and see if this changes your mind on pushing the button or not. In 2004, Marty was the head coach. We drafted Dave Ball.
Yep.
I'm sure you know Dave Ball from UCLA. And obviously, there's rookie shows. So right before the final preseason game, there's a rookie show. And Dave Ball does the greatest Marty Schottenheimer impersonation ever. With the sun hat, with the playthings, and the shirt, and all the anachronisms, and brings the house down. It's hilarious what he does. So the next day, we're playing against the San Francisco 49ers in San Francisco. And it's all non-starters, right? It's the fourth game. And Dave Ball's going to make our squad. He's a fifth-round draft pick. He had a nice NFL career. And somewhere in the third quarter, he sacks the 49er quarterback. And there's a flag on the play. And the referee goes, holding offense and decline. And Marty goes, we want to accept that penalty. Like, you just sacked the quarterback. You guys lost it down.
Yeah.
And he goes, and the rest is, you want to take it? And he goes, yes. So the ref does it and marches it off. And Marty turns around and basically says, F that guy. That'll teach him.
Yeah,
so he took his sack off the board.
Yeah. No
in
kidding.
good fun,
Man.
right? Now, if this was a rookie that would never make the team, a free agent, that's kind of cruel. This is a guy that was going to make our squad. He's going to get his sacks.
Yeah.
Marty had his side too. So
yeah. So
with that in mind, pressure's on. Are you pushing the button, firing the cannons, or not?
If I'm going to handicap it, look, I'll say me. I think I'm a little bit of a coward in that situation. I think you threw all caution to the wind and went for it.
Well, I actually chickened out.
Did you? Yeah.
Now, part of me that almost made me push it is it's probably not loaded anyway. So it'd be fun to say I pushed it. Yeah. But I was like, what if it went off? And what if somebody's mad and, there's something other. And as you said, I have to fool people and pretend I'm a doctor and I can have some self-control and decorum. So for all that buildup for Fire the Cannons, and to this day, I wonder if there was anything that would have happened. If it's electronic, it's probably turned off, kind of thing. You can't imagine that it's unlocked and people can just walk in there.
It might have been, but then you know what it's like around an NFL team though too. Like the buttholes are so constantly tight about stuff like that if somehow the people in Tampa would have thought that was like akin to Spygate or something and would have made a big deal out of it. And then all of a sudden you're having to answer to the owner or to the coach about it. So it's just not, as a player, whenever you're within the locker room or in season, you always feel this kind of just heavy weight of expectations and responsibility to the team. And when you step away from it in January or February, it feels like you can actually exhale a little bit again. So I'd like to think that, and I've spoken my mind at times where I probably should have kept my mouth shut. But when it comes to just firing a cannon, I would have chickened out. You should feel no shame over that. Well,
I feel better because if Seth Payne would have chickened out, I don't feel bad about chickening out. And my other logic was I'm not a central character in this play, right? Yeah. I'm a peripheral. And so you got to stay peripheral, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if it somehow was central to me, I would have put, So I chickened out. Thank you for making me feel better about not firing the cannons.
Schottenheimer was kind of part of my welcome to the NFL experience because I was a rookie in 1997, and we played Kansas City a couple times in those first 2 or 3 years that I was in the league. And I just remember – Schottenheimer was this old school NFL guy that said, hey, we don't care if you know what we're going to run. We're going to be more physical than you. We're going to be better than you. We can line up and we can be by formation and down and distance. You might know that it's going to be lead or power, and we're just going to smash you in the mouth. And let's see who's still standing at the end of the game. And so I loved that because you just you knew what you were getting, and it was like a test of your manhood when you played a Marty Schottenheimer team.
It was like an Oklahoma drill for the game. You knew what was coming.
Yeah, and the guys that played for Schottenheimer, you wonder how Schottenheimer would have had to maybe change over with the years, and I think he did a pretty good job of it. But I mean, the way they hit in practice. And you as an orthopedist knew this, it wasn't like most NFL teams. They hit like they were a 1970s Big 12 team or something.
Yeah, no question. And like most tough teachers, like when you're going through that professor, that teacher who's really tough on you, you don't really always appreciate them. But down the road, you really do. And that's what happened with Marty. When I was fortunate enough to go back, the players liked Marty, but I think they grew to love him more the older they got, the more they got down the road. And there was some special reverence when a bunch of us were out at LT's enshrinement for the Hall of Fame, and Marty and his family were there. And everyone was with LT at one of his functions. And then players heard that Marty was next door at a restaurant, and everybody wanted to just leave immediately and go over and say hello to Marty. And it was such a big deal, and the reverence there. And I think that was over time. They realized what he did was good for him. But at the time, you may not love that Oklahoma drill.
Yeah. Oh no, there's definitely playing for Coughlin is a little bit like that. It's like if it's like growing up with a really strict father that you might really chafe against him and think you hate him when you're in high school. And when you get older and have kids of your own, you realize, okay, I see what he was thinking now. And I understand why he did what he did and why he acted the way he acted. Coughlin for sure, a lot of guys have that experience with.
All right. So you're in Houston. Since we're talking about Marty, and this is obviously unscripted. It's like, it's almost like you're having a cocktail or beer in your hand, right? We're just chatting.
Yeah.
Compare and contrast Marty Schottenheimer to Jack Easterby.
Oh, okay. So Jack Easterby, who is currently, I believe his current title is Director of Football Operations. He was a character coach in New England who went on to be the Director of Team Development for the Texans. When the Texans tried to hire away Nick Caserio 2 years ago to be their general manager, the owner decided, you know what, we'll just have Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby and a committee act like the general manager. And really it was Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby side by side the whole time. And that's when we got the trading 2 first-round picks for Laramie Tunsil, trading away Jadeveon Clowney, ultimately trading away DeAndre Hopkins, giving out a whole bunch of bloated contracts. It was a really, really bad stretch of bad contracts and bad decisions. And Bill O'Brien got fired and Jack Easterby remained. And I think the overriding question that a lot of people have in Houston, some people on the football team or in the organization have is, how is this character coach, this guy who's super religious, grabs people's hands to pray with them at various times, and kind of just is a walking, talking motivational quote, why is he necessarily in the position he's in? And I really still haven't gotten a good answer. He seemingly has this Rasputin-like hold over the owner, and nobody can really figure it out. They've got this plan where culture trumps everything, and they want these smart, tough, and dependable players, but almost to the exclusion of actually having talented football players on your roster. So Jack Easterby compared to Marty Schottenheimer, I would say that Marty Schottenheimer was the ultimate in actual, like, boots on the ground competence, right? The actual understands offense, understands scheme, understands people and human beings. And that's probably the key distinction, because Jack Easterby is the ultimate football outsider who doesn't really understand football, but he's supposed to understand things like emotional intelligence and perhaps organizational psychology, that type of stuff, and has a rapport with people and players, which he did in New England when he was just the character coach. He was kind of the high five guy, like everybody. Yeah, he's just this guy that hung around. But now, as the guy who's in charge of trying to instill a certain culture in the organization, he's created one of the most dysfunctional and toxic relationships or toxic cultures in the NFL, to the point where guys like Deshaun Watson, J.J. Watt, the team president, Jamie Roots, have all either quit, requested a trade, or just requested their release, like J.J. Watt did last week, and he was granted it. So it's that's a really stark contrast between those two. I think one's the ultimate football guy and one's the ultimate outsider, which I would be a fan of. I kind of like thinking outside the box, except you can't just think that your ideas are good just because they're outside the box. They have to be both outside the box but also good ideas.
Here, tell me if this makes sense, and I'll relate it to Marty, but also Jack Easterby, who I've never met. Marty was sort of a tough guy coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of our previous coaches was Mike Riley, a very rah-rah college players coach. Norv was somewhere in between. And it's always been my feeling that whether you're tough guy Tom Coughlin, whether you're Bill Belichick, all business, whether you're friendly coach and players coach and Pete Carroll or whatever you are, I think all those styles can work. with the same team, with the same players. I think some teams are more suited to a friendly coach or a tough guy coach or whatever. But I found in my time in the NFL, having worked with a lot of different head coaches and other coaches and other GMs or people, the number one quality that I think you have to have, and if you don't have it, you will fail. You can be a tough guy, you can be a nice guy, but you have to be authentic because you're in the building so long and with each other so much. If you're fake, you get seen through. If you're fake tough guy, they are not going to like you. If you're fake nice guy, they are not going to like you. If you're fake religious guy, they are not going to like you. If you're authentic and live your life religious guy, I mean, Philip Rivers never swore at his family. He was widely accepted by everybody and very nice. But if you're like a, part-time religious guy, I'm not trying to get religion to it, a part-time tough guy, part-time this, that, the other, and inauthentic, I think the players hate you. That's
I think you're exactly right. The time spent with each other is a big thing. Compared to college where there's strict restrictions on how much time you can spend with the players. In the NFL, there are some restrictions, but for the most part, it's an all-day, it's a full-time job, and you're around each other all the time in a really high-stress environment. And I think that there's something that's going on in the NFL right now that's almost pervasive, which is people who are preaching culture in a way that is almost like they're trying to transplant ideas from corporate America and making them work on an NFL team. And I think that's exactly what Jack Easterby is trying to do. The problem with that is that, look, if you've got a large company and you're manufacturing widgets, then when you're seeking employees, there are literally thousands upon thousands of people who are going to be qualified for whichever position you fill. So you might want to hire for a certain personality type. You might want to hire for a certain skill set. But then you bring a lot of people together, and usually it's in a company that's much bigger than a football team, which really on the football side of things is only 100 people or so, between coaches and
it's a small company, right? It's not it's $1 billion business, but it's a small company.
Yeah, right. So you see all these things where I think culture is almost like in an organization where the Texans are right now. You have these people, these guys like Jack Easterby, who can go and talk to a team owner or the board members or whomever else that make a good pitch and sell a dream or a vision of like, oh, wow, we're going to have this great culture. And because of this culture, then everybody will be pulling in the same direction. And that's all great. It's all good stuff. The problem is that in the NFL, at any given time, there are only 1,500 people who are qualified to even be on a team in the NFL. And only about 750 of them are qualified to start, and really even fewer than that because every team's got a bunch of guys that they would prefer they were upgrades. So when you start being so strict about your culture or your hiring practices or who's good enough for your culture, who isn't, you start to really narrow down your talent pool. And it can be really hard to field a competitive football team. And I think right now, guys like Jack Easterby, who only, when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. A guy like Jack Easterby, his only hammer is really, hey, I'm the culture guy. I'm the organizational psychology guy. So everything becomes a culture problem instead of wait a second. You're telling me that DeAndre Hopkins isn't good enough to be on your team because of culture? Like, what the hell are you talking about? No, the talent is the most important thing. Figure out a way to coach him. Figure out a way to keep Deshaun Watson from wanting to flee your team. Figure those things out, and the culture will follow. If you hire really good football players who are competitive as hell, who DeAndre Hopkins is, who Deshaun Watson is, who J.J. Watt is, the culture will come, and it'll take on, and you've seen this, it takes on the personality of the head coach because it's a small organization. As long as you have that and you've got a coach that holds guys to high standards, you'll develop your own culture. But you can't pigeonhole or force feed people into a certain culture because it just doesn't work that way in an environment like the NFL.
Yeah, I agree. And it's kind of like, believe football, you have to be very intelligent to play because you really need to know the schemes and the plays and the downs defensively and offensively. But no offense here, but you can't just recruit and sign up a whole team of Ivy Leaguers. It doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Oh, that's exactly what I would tell you, Dr. Chow, is that
That's not a shot at you. I just,
no.
Yeah.
Because I take that shot at myself when the mantra for the last couple of years has been tough, smart, dependable. They started off saying smart, tough, dependable, but the acronym for that is STD. So they figured out, okay, we'll go with dependable. They said dependable, tough, smart. They messed around with various variations until finally they put it on a T-shirt in training camp, and it had to be dependable, tough, and smart. So I think that it made me think of when I was a player. Coaches would tell me, because I was a hardworking guy and I showed up early and stayed late and busted my butt, all that stuff. And every now and then a coach would tell me, Seth, if we just had 22 guys like you, we'd win the Super Bowl every year. And my first thought was always like, that's complete BS, man. That's not true one bit. Like you need a few knuckleheads who are physical freaks who are going to go out and not necessarily do everything by the book. But when you're trying to compete against other teams that have physical freaks that are maybe a little screwy in the head or whatever, like there's a continuum there, and you got to make some concessions here. And first and foremost, you got to have some extreme physical talent on that team, because a team full of nice guys will get you really what the Texans have had the last several years until this last year when everything went haywire was a bunch of 9-7 performances, 10-6 at times, but ultimately playoff disappointments.
Yeah, I hear you there. But just so you know, you probably never knew this, but you know how you're in the locker room, this guy went to USC, this guy went to Nebraska, this guy went to Alabama, and you claim all the players around the league. I claimed everyone from the Ivy Leagues. I didn't even play football, but I needed to claim the entire Ivy League, anyone who's in the NFL, just because I needed more bodies. So I claimed you. I claimed everybody, right? I claimed Marcellus Wiley when he's on our team from Columbia. Obviously, Ryan Fitzpatrick's a bellwether right now. That's what you got to do when you're, and I didn't even play football, but,
It was cool. The cool thing about a lot of the Ivy League players is that they're really a lot of late bloomers because they're guys that they end up making it in the NFL because then maybe they didn't get scholarship offers because they were a little small. I grew 2 inches in college, so I grew 2 inches and put on 60 pounds. I became a man like my sophomore year in college. So I was like, Marcellus Wiley was a running back when he started off.
With those crazy legs? That's crazy.
Yeah. He still played short yardage running back in the Ivy League. Can you imagine that? We'd line up and Marcellus Wiley was bigger than everybody on our defensive line except for me. And he's, just galloping over his offensive line for first downs and short yardage. So you do get a lot of kind of maybe the scrappier guys they've got good football IQs. They're bright guys, but they weren't necessarily dominant. When you're not a dominant kid or dominant enough to get a scholarship out of high school, I think you've got a certain appreciation for it when you get to the NFL. I felt way, way more grateful than guys who maybe by the time they were juniors in high school knew they had a shot at the NFL and almost looked at it as their meal ticket versus something that is like the genuine gift that it is. I mean, you work your butt off for it, but part of it is that you're lucky enough to win the genetic lottery to be good enough to play.
Yeah. Well, if you have time, normally the guest segment, we just do a guest segment, but I'd love to do part 2 with you and talk some fun stuff if you've got the time.
Yeah, I'm good.
The one final question is my Tiger comes back in the room here. Hi, Tiger. Is J.J. Watt, Bill O'Brien being fired? What was the fight? What was the real story?
I don't know. I haven't dug for that. So I really don't know. I'll say that, O'Brien ran obviously a kind of a high stress environment at times. I don't think he has a side to him that has a heart, and there's a side to Bill O'Brien, and maybe the majority of the time that's who he is actually a pretty cool guy, but he's got a volatile temper, and he would go off about just random various things that left people confused sometimes about why exactly he was even going off about that. And as the pressure mounted, what people told me this last year was that as the pressure mounted with him acting as the general manager and with this season being as weird as it was, well, Bill O'Brien was also, remember, DeAndre Hopkins was traded right at the beginning of the pandemic. So his plan to all of a sudden have these guys like Brandon Cooks and Randall Cobb and David Johnson, of those three guys, I would say only one of those guys was somebody you should have been optimistic about, and Brandon Cooks, that these guys were going to somehow replace DeAndre Hopkins, and that you're going to do it without a real training camp. It sounded like the pressure really started to get to him. And when the Texans started off 0-4, I think at the time of the fight, it was either after they had lost their first, I think after their first 3 games or their first 2 games, it was a really high stress environment by that point. So it could have been any number of things, but yeah, the tension was boiling.
Yeah. And by the way, I played fantasy football for the first time this year, like in a real league, this, Scott Fishbowl League, etc. And essentially, I drafted Brandon Cooks early, like not top of the draft, but early the most, because my theory was that come hell or high water, Bill O'Brien was going to make that trade work, that trade work, right? Because right, he's catching so much flack that, and Cooks is a good receiver, but they're going to be vested to make that work. Didn't work out that well, but
the scariest thing for me was when they made that trade. And, when you first heard DeAndre Hopkins was traded, everybody flipped the hell out, as you should have. But then the second thought is, okay, well, what are they getting in return? And you realize, well, actually, I think the first news that came out was that the Texans had traded for David Johnson. And then you wonder, well, why are they trading for David Johnson? What's going on here? And then you thought, okay, well, what's the return going to be? And it turns out that, like, oh, no, you're giving away DeAndre Hopkins for David Johnson in a second rounder. But it was when I got even more nervous was when I realized, like, oh, look, David Johnson was really, really good when he was still in his prime, but it's been since 2016. I didn't think that they seriously were going to treat him as their feature back, but that's what they did. So that's when it really became evident that everything was out of control.
Yeah. All right. As I play catch with my daughter here, we'll take a quick break. We'll come back with part 2 of the Pro Football Doc podcast, more lighthearted stuff. I want to hear about Mattress Mac. We'll talk about avocado tequila and other things. Quick break here. Thanks for listening.